Hello, children. It's Senleon again. We're going to read another fantastic story from Literatica. This one is by It's Jessie. It is called How to Negotiate by Lady Jaina. A gust of hot, dusty air bombarded her soft, creamy skin as she stepped through the blue portal in front of the war chief's lair. As she made her way into the imposing building, the guards nodded at her. Jaina was known by many orcs to be a friend of thralls, and therefore the orcs as well. She was clad in her usual attire, a small steel-plated corset and a long flowing skirt. Aside from her usual, she was also wearing the enchanted cloak which Arthas had given her nearly a decade before. Thinking of this, she strode into Garas's chambers, cloak wrapped tight around her, and little tears forming in her eyes. "Greetings, son of Hellstream," she engaged, stepping up in front of his throne and giving a curtsy. She had lifted her skirt up higher than necessary. "Greetings, human," he replied, his lower lip curling, "and welcome to Orgrimmar." "Thank you, Warchief. The city certainly looks different, more aggressive." "Of course. I suppose you lions are not used to such large fortresses, as you cower beneath your tents." Jaina's mouth twitched after hearing his comment. Obviously, negotiating with the orcs would be more difficult without Thrall. She smiled after thinking of her shaman friend. She had given him a hearthstone set to her personal chamber so that they could continue their negotiations even after he stepped down from the position of war chief. "I suppose you're right. The Alliance isn't used to such large things, but bigger isn't always better, I can assure you." She smiled at him and looked around the room for the first time, not bothering to see if he had risen to take the bait. The room was empty, save for the hulking brown orc seated atop the throne and a small human woman. The lack of guards in the room led her to wonder if, in his arrogance, he believed he could actually take her in a fight. "Why do you come here, little pink skin? I will not be as friendly or welcoming as Thrall was. In fact, I would have slain you myself if not for Thrall's instructions not to," he said, though deep down he wasn't sure if he could actually kill the powerful sorceress. "Why do you insist upon using violence to solve our problems? There are other ways to solve things, just as there are other ways to negotiate without using words." Jaina gave him a mischievous smile and a wink before turning around and walking towards a nearby table. Taking off her cloak, she draped it across the table, turning back around. "Look, I'll be blunt with you, Garrosh. I've got more negotiations to conduct with Velen and Lady Sylvanas soon, and the Dark Lady does not take kindly to people who hate." She shivered at that, recalling the last time she was late to the undead beauty's personal chambers. Granted, it wasn't exactly her fault. She had been fucked silly by a group of murlocs who were wandering too close to Theramore. "As you know, I'm more of a pacifist than an antagonist, or something of the like. But I have found that my way of fighting a war is just as fruitful in results compared to one's prone to violence." She slipped off one snow-white glove and then the other, before taking off her shoulder pads and setting them on a table next to the gloves. "What do you say?" she asked, small hands working on removing her corset. "Do you think you might be interested in seeing how I get things done?" As she finished saying this, the corset fell from her body and was placed upon the table. Looking up, she raised an eyebrow. The orc was already working on removing his pants. "Well, aren't you an eager beaver?" he giggled. Wait, he laughed. And she began giggling even after he removed his pants. His cock was small, well, for an orc at least, and it looked ridiculous compared to his large body. "What are you laughing at?" he growled, his body tensing as he clenched his fists. This unnecessary act of aggression caused his cock to swing back and forth, making Jaina snort in a fit of laughter. Don't worry, big boy. Like I said earlier, it's not the size of the hammer that counts, it's how you wield it. A dwarf once told me that, while he was cramming cock down my throat. The blonde sorceress conjured a swirling elixir, which changed colors from pink to dark purple, and held it out to him. Try this. It'll help you with your little problem. Don't drink it all of it, though. It only requires a few sips to take effect. Garrosh grabbed the elixir out of her hand, nearly dropping it as he drank over half of it, and then placed it on the throne. His dangling meat began to twitch before it suddenly started to expand. It grew longer and thicker until it at least gained 13 inches. Jaina sighed. Nice going, pal. That'll never fit all the way in me. I told you only to take a few sips. Bah! I will make it fit inside of you. Garrosh roared and grabbed her, lifting her up with ease. He bent her over his throne and pulled up her skirt, revealing her taut rear end. His rigid brown cock was inches from her cunt, which was still hidden by a pair of white and lavender panties. Don't rip those. Those are my favorite. She stopped short at the sound of fabric ripping pierced. She stopped short as the sound of fabric ripping pierced the air, followed by her panties being thrown on top of her head. She sighed, but her sigh quickly turned into a squeal as Garrosh pushed the red head of his cock into her hungry twat. Not one for foreplay, are you? She gasped. Garrosh placed one large hand on her ass, totally encompassing it, as his other hand reached for her blonde hair, grabbing it and pulling her head up. He pushed his hips forward into her, ramming his thick manhood into her tight pink hole. Jaina's eyes bulged. She bucked against him instinctively, a loud shriek spilling from her mouth. You are tiny, he laughed, pulling her small body back against him by yanking her hair and pushing her ass back towards him. So, you, just a minute ago. I do not need your elixir, woman. My rage was all that I needed to increase my size. Jaina rolled her eyes, even as the orc let go of her hair and allowed her head to drop off the side of the throne. Grunting in pain as her chin hit the side of the giant chair, she was caught unaware as the hulking orc impaled her once more upon his shaft and began to pump in and out of her. His cock was thick, and it dwarfed her pussy in comparison. Each thrust was met with strict resistance, and her cunt quivered like a leaf along the rest of her pale body. Take it easy on me, will you? A dick that big was never meant to fit inside a little hole like that. Garrosh snorted, stuck one large thumb in her puckered asshole. Orcs do not go easy on their opponents, much less puny alliance. Before Jaina could reply, the new war chief let out a deafening roar that gave her ass a hard, stinging slap before beginning his true assault on her cunts. The slap had caused Jaina to burst out in a painful wail as tears formed in her eyes. His large hand had left a red mark all across her rear end, along with a painful stinging sensation. Despite the pain, Jaina loved it. She moaned and yelled out her love for the cock plundering her sweet pussy. Each thrust caused little explosions of tingling pleasure to explode all throughout her body. She clawed her fingers against the throat, damaging her nails even as she was pressed down and nearly squashed from the hulking orc pressing down on her. His brutal thrust tore through her cunt and sank deep. He couldn't fit the entire length of his meat inside of her, but his thrusts were hard and ruthless. He spanked her frequently and enjoyed listening to her cries each time he yanked her head up by her blonde tresses. Jaina was panting heavily, and her eyes were half lidded by the time Garrosh slowed his jarring thrusts. She licked her lips in anticipation for his hot, sticky load to splatter across her face. Instead, the orc erupted deep inside of her, shooting his load of milky cum into her waiting cunt. Jaina could feel it inside of her. She shivered. She liked the feeling, but she didn't want any half-breed children. Most of his cum seeped out and trickled from her gaping snatch, and several drops of the fluid made its way into her eager womb. Thinking quickly, the powerful sorceress began to cast a spell to incinerate the milky wet fluid, but was interrupted when she was yanked up by her hair and thrown onto the ground. Shaking her head, Um, where did I just lost myself. Shaking her head, even, she looked up, only to be smacked in the face with a large and rather heavy cock. As the cock made contact with her cheek, it spurted out a stream of thick spunk, which trailed from her left eye to the right side of her cheek. She opened her mouth to say something, but was again interrupted when her body was pulled forward towards the orc who had grabbed a hold of her ankles, pushed forward on her ankles until they were next to her ears, and both of her holes were on display. His brown eyes locked on her puckered asshole, and his mouth twisted into a savage grin. "This will hurt, human." At that, he took careful aim, judging and making sure he could slide in with one smooth thrust. He shoved his hips forward until his large tangerine-like balls were nestled firmly against her quivering body. The whole time Jaina had cried out a long, agonizing scream. Garrosh did not give her a chance to recover, instead deciding to begin his inevitably successful crusade against her asshole. Jaina did not stop screaming for a good 3 minutes. When she did stop, her screams were replaced by moans and whispers. Head fell back onto the ground, eyes closed, and disheveled blonde hair splayed out across the stone floor. The cum on her face from earlier was beginning to dry, and a crusty film could be seen trailing across her face. The only thing louder than her hoarse moans was Garrosh's grunting as he pummeled her resisting asshole into submission, and the sounds being made of his balls. Mind you, they are tangerine-like, slapping against her. She wanted him to finish, but a particular mind-jarring thrust caused Jaina's body to erupt in fire. Literally. Fire danced and shot through the insides of her body, a product of her own creation, and one she was enjoying at the moment. Garrosh didn't notice, but Jaina screamed as best as she could as an orgasm overtook her. Her spells protected her from any burns, but the fire tickled her body as Garrosh worked her ass over. As she screamed, fire erupted from her mouth, and her sweet womanly juices squirted all out of her dripping pussy. Yes, Jaina is a fire breather. She shook all over, and the energy had seeped almost completely out of her body. She couldn't even lift an arm. But Garrosh still continued to drill his manhood into her. Inch by inch, his cock stretched and filled her whorish hole, claiming it and destroying it at the same time. He didn't care for her satisfaction, and he didn't care when her body went limp. He kept hammering away, grunting, and occasionally reaching out to squeeze one glob of bouncing flesh. His eyes were locked on his throne, even as he plucked the human sorceress senseless, recalling how far he had come since the Grand. He had helped topple the Lich King, and he became the War Chief. And now the most powerful human mage on the planet was being plowed under him, a cowardly member of the Alliance. He roared a cry of victory and grabbed a hold of her hair, pulling up so that she was bent into a C shape. He plunged his thick orcish meat into her asshole and erupted, his seed pumped out of his cock like a garden hose, filling and soaking the bowels of her ass until a gushing stream of fluid started to leak out. It drizzled out all over the floor and onto the bear rug he had positioned himself on. Panting, he stayed still for a moment as his senses came back to him. No longer was his mind clouded by rage and the lust for a slutty human mage. Secret trades and agreements flashed his mind. Thrall, Ashenbeck, Sylvanas, his people, his father, his duties came back to him, and in doing so freed him from the sexual bonds the Princess of Coltyrus and the leader of Theramore had thrown over him. Why would he help the humans? Alliance scum. He pulled out and stood up, looking to the side. He allowed her legs to fall back, down to the ground. As they fell, cum leaked out of each hole, and as he looked at her body, he realized that she was unconscious. Letting out a boisterous laugh, he leaned down and grabbed her hair before hauling her up to her knees. Jaina awoke with a shriek. As the roots of her hair were pulled, it was silenced. Silenced as her hair was dropped, and she was once again slapped in the face with the war chief's softening cock. Grinning, Garrosh wrapped one large hand around his shaft and pumped until a flash of white cum shot out of the head and landed on her face. It hit her square on the tip of the nose, causing it to splash across her face and get into her eyes. Jaina Proudmore blinked and stood up. Feeling lightheaded and sore, her feet wobbled as she made face the towering brown orc. I trust that this will ensure safety for my people no matter what. I do not wish to fight, as Thrall would have you know. She struggled to speak. Through gasp of air, her naked chest heaving, her pink nipples still hard. You think I would make a deal with the Alliance? Do not make me laugh, woman. Jaina's eyes widened, and her small fists clenched in anger. You use me? I don't believe Thrall was happy to hear of this, brute. Are you threatening me? Orc took a step towards her, all prior fear of her gone. Seeing her naked and hearing her cries had certainly assuaged his fear of her power. Jaina stepped back a few feet and made for her belongings. Quickly throwing them on, she had turned to him, anger in her eyes. Let us hope that I do not meet you on the battlefield, ogre. She would have given him a show of her power right there, but her mind was a little fuzzy, and her energy was low. Instead, she made her way home. The sorceress struggled to even make out a simple portal after having her brains pretty much drilled out of her by the orc's pleasing cock. After the fourth attempt, the blonde succeeded in opening a portal, which she quickly took to Tirisfal. She was late. The Banshee Queen was not going to be happy. And that, my friends, and my children, is another story with Senleon. Thank you and good night.